Okay, fine. Let's go. So we were up to. Okay, so I think we're up to. It's like 2/3 Toshma, I think, which is about nearly halfway down Chesed Aleph. Basically, just to recap, what we are trying to work out is whether Abai or Rava is correct. The central machlokus between Abai and Rava, which we have to keep coming back to because that is the whole focus of the entire sugya, is the Mishnah discusses a situation when a person wants to dig a pit in their property, and the digging of that pit is going to affect someone else's pit in the next door garden because it's going to the water or whatever it is. It talks about the damage itself when you actually the image the ground, etc., etc. Right. So that's the Mishnah. Abai and Rava's machlokas is habol is smoch b'tzad hameitza. So there's no pit there. There's nothing in the other guy's property. He hasn't done anything to his property yet. But the question is, are you restricted in the way you use your land because of the fact that with time he may come to use his property in a certain way? That's the base. That is the debate between Abai and Rava. Abai says you can. You don't have to worry about that. You can put your stuff, your pit right up to the fence. And Rava says no, you can't. Now, let's stop there. It would have been straightforward. But there was two ways of understanding in the Gemora what the machlokus was, which has significant ramifications. Because the first approach was the whole machlokus is only with a soda she'ena asur l'boros, a soda, a field which he doesn't usually. You don't usually put dig pits in, basically, right? So in other words, then Abai says Abai you can put right to the border because you wouldn't expect him to dig a pit in his property. That's not the usage of this land. And Rava says even so you can't, because he might say, listen, all right, you did it, so I'm going to do it too, right? But according to that version, in a situation where it's the norm to dig pits, no one says you can put it up to the border, right? No one says you can. The other way of learning, though, the Ikad Amri was the other way around. In other words, if it's a field which doesn't usually have pits in, everyone says you put it up to the border. You have to think that he may use it for that purpose. And the whole machlokus is only when it's not. The whole machlokus is only when it is normally. You do normally put pits in. You do normally put pits in the field. And Abai says you can go up close, even though it's expected that he will dig a pit, right? And the reason is because there's no pit there now. He doesn't, it's true that he may dig a pit in the future, but he hasn't dug one now, so you don't have to worry about that. And that's even according to the Rabbanon. There's a machlokas Rabbanon and Rabbi Yossi, which you need to have in mind as well, just to make things even easier, which is about whether you say ala nizik l'harchakas atzmo or ala mazik l'harchakas atzmo. And that means to say like this: in a situation where you're causing harm to someone else who's digging in your own property, who is the one responsible to take steps to prevent the harm? Is it the person causing the damage or the person suffering the damage? And I said to you last week, if you recall, that this debate between Rabban and Rabbi Yossi, which is a mission at the end of the perek, runs through this perek, right? This very critical question as to who is liable to take the steps to prevent the damage occurring: the person who puts the damage in play or the person who is on the receiving end. And the problem with this, which is what we have to come back to, is the logical approach obviously would be, well, if you're causing me damage, you're the one who has to step back, right? But the specific situation that they're arguing about is a scenario where it is indirect. That's what we said. We said Moda Rabbi Yossi, when we looked up the more Moda Rabbi Yossi Begeri delay. If there's direct damage, we gave the example of someone who lives downstairs and there's a hole in the roof, and there's a guy who lives upstairs. If every time he washes his hands, the water goes straight through the hole in the roof into the guy downstairs, everyone says you're liable for that damage. That's like shooting an arrow. If you didn't say that, you would be left with the absurd conclusion that someone who points a gun at someone else and shoots it, you could say, well, you should have moved out of the way. Right? Yeah, that which is obviously wrong, right? That's the absurd conclusion we want to avoid. Rather, what is the case that the Rabbi Yossi are arguing about? Situation, for example, where you plant a tree in your property, for example, and with time the roots are going to go into his property. It doesn't have to be the time. It happens very quickly, right? It happens very quickly, but it's not something that transpires directly. That's the machlokes of Rabbi Yossi. Why is that relevant to here?
What's the initial thinking that one wouldn't be liable for those damages? if I light a fire and sparks, as you said, it's covered on the cover, this kind of things.
Yeah, well, you're a mazik, exactly. You're a mazik, and therefore you're responsible. You mean what? You mean what's the thing? Why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you think that's the case?
Why wouldn't
the case here? If you grow a tree and the roots are going to damage someone else, then why would you even think that's acceptable?
And that's in fact what Rabbi Yossi says. You're not responsible. Rabbi Yossi says you're not liable. You're not responsible. You don't have to worry about it. You're allowed to use your property in that way.
Yeah, but what's his thinking like that? How is that happening?
So was that? Yeah, that's really the central question here. To what degree do we expect people to take precautions to prevent themselves coming to harm? And to what degree are other people responsible for preventing them coming to harm? That's what this is the central question of this parak, and it's a massively important question in any legal system, right? In English law, the Havdil, you have the concept of the reasonable man. I remember when I was doing my undergraduate degree was in law at Open University, and you have to get so used to that concept, the reasonable man. Is any of your lawyers? Who's a lawyer? Not a lawyer. Anyway, basic law is that the reasonable man. Would the man on the Clapham omnibus? That's what they used to call it. The man on, what would the, I don't know what it's Clapham omnibus. That's what they used to say. Would the reasonable man come to this conclusion? Would the person? So you're always trying to work out how human beings behave, right? So an example given in the Gemora later on, which is what we quoted last time, is what was the case? Trying to remember. There was one. There was. What was it? That's right. That's right. Yeah, there was the case when there was these people where they would they were beating flax. Do you remember that? They were beating flax, and they used to, and the flax used to go in the wind and cause some damage. The flax, whatever they were beating out of the flax, would travel along and cause some injury to someone. Ravina said that even though Rabbi Yossi agrees with direct damage is a problem, that's only if it's directly from what he did. Here, it travels on the wind. It travels on the wind. It's not your responsibility. It's their responsibility. Move out of the way. It's too far removed from your action.
Still your action. I don't see where.
So to be honest, this is something, again, as like I said, we have to work through this because again, it comes up again and again. So we'll see if we can get more clues to it. But I did see something today that actually I can just bring. I was going to bring it anyway at some point. I'm going to bring it now, and that is I mean, the Rebbe Chanan Wasserman in his Kovetz Shiurim asked the question about he's actually talking about Grom, the concept of kind of indirect damage, right? Where there's this question, should it be allowed, should it be not allowed? And his question is, how can you possibly say that you can be allowed to cause damage to someone else? He says, we have basic principles in the Torah. Whatever you don't want done to yourself, don't do to someone else. Yeah, and he quotes another very fascinating proof. He says, even if the damage to someone else comes of its own accord, there's a din of hashavas aveda, not to allow a damage to be caused to someone else. Because you obviously can't cause damage. What is the principle of returning a lost item? Right? That if you don't take steps to save this thing, he's going to lose out. That's why that's the whole mitzvah, right? That's the whole mitzvah. So it's a kol shekain. How much more? If already you got to go, you see his donkey wandering around, you got to take it into your house so he doesn't lose out. How much more so can you not go and cause this damage? It's a basic, simple question. So he says, he says the hakashani here is different. Here, the possibility exists for the person who is suffering the damage to remove himself so that he doesn't suffer that damage. And in that situation, the concept of returning a lost item, or at least the comparison he's making to that, doesn't exist. Because one of the rules of Hashavas Aveda is, it's within the rules of Hashavas Aveda, very clever what he does here, because within the rules of Hashavas Aveda is the concept of Shalcha Kodem Shel Kol Adam. If you were going to have to sacrifice your own property to save someone else's property, you're not obligated to do that. That lies outside the boundaries of what you're obligated to do. The examples are, the whole Gemora, but say it talks about this, where so if you go off and save his item, you're going to lose a business deal or something like that. You know, you're going to lose. You don't have to lose money. You lose yourself. I think that's a good example, but there might be others. But the principle is shachol kodem shachol adar. So here as well, the only way to save this person suffering the damage is to restrict your right to do something which you're completely legally entitled to do. Be that planting a tree in your property, be that standing there and beating flax, even though the flax seeds go off in the wind and may cause damage to someone else. And Rabbi Yossi says, let him take precautions. You're not obligated to take those precautions. I don't know if that makes.
I understand what Rabbi Yossi is saying. I'm trying to work out what's his source for that opinion.
Right. Okay. What is source? Okay. I mean, well, the question is, do you need a source? Because you could say it's a svara. If you think about it. You know, what society do we live in? You know, to try and restrict your ability to live in a normal way is that's what the Rabbanan are saying. Rabbanan are saying you cannot plant a tree in your property. You're not allowed to.
It doesn't restrict it. It just says if you plant a tree, you've got to make sure that it's not going to damage someone else's property. It doesn't seem.
No, the Rabbanan say that you can't plant it because of the damage it might cause. Because ala mazek l'harchinsatz, you're the mazek. You know because his bar is there now, you can't plant your tree because it's going to cause that damage. You have to distance it a certain distance. Yeah. I mean, that's
okay.
Yeah. Like I said, we'll come back to it because we're going to come back to this machlokas again and again. So why is this important for here? Because both Abai and Rava justify their opinions according to both opinions, in the sense that according to the Ikad Amri, we said that when it's a field that's not, people don't usually dig pits, and everyone says you can go up to the wall because it's not expected to dig a pit in his field, so you don't have to worry about it again when it doesn't exist now. But if it is a place that normally he digs pits in, so Rabbi says that you can go right up to the wall, even according to the Rabbanan who say that your responsibility, you the mazik have the responsibility to distance. That is only where there is a clear and present something to damage. You know, there is a bar there. Where there is no bar, it's not a problem. Where there's no pit there now in the other guy's property, it's fine. And Rabbi Yossi and Rava says you cannot go near, even though, right? You cannot go near, even though there's no pit now. And he says even Rabbi Yossi, who says that it's the responsibility of the other bloke to distance himself, right? That is not the case where it is what we call geirei delay. It's a direct damage. And here, every time you hit a spade in the ground, you are weakening his land. And that's not acceptable. That's what Rava says. It's not acceptable to do that, right? So it comes out according to the first way of learning. According to the first way of learning, there is no situation when Rava allows you to put your your bar on the border. Now you have to bear that in mind. A lot of the questions are on Rava. Okay, you with me? According to the first way of learning, Rava says in every scenario, regardless of whether it's a field that normally, whether you can expect the guy to dig a pit in his property or not, you can never put the bar in your property on the border. You're always going to have that 3 tefachim margin in case he comes to use his land in that way. That's Rava's view. Okay, and that's what we ask on multiple times through this Omud, where we seem to ostensibly have multiple cases where people are allowed to put or do something because there's nothing there to damage as things stand. Okay, that's what we're up to. So on that, so the Gemara asks Toshma, you'll see immediately what I mean now. Toshma, the Gemara asks the following proof from here. The Mishnah, I think this is a Mishnah or Brisa. Lo yiftach odom chanus shanach toimen. A person's not allowed to open a. What's that? Sorry, nearly halfway down. It's about 15 lines down on Yud Ches Omid Aleph. Yes, I think this is a. 1 second. This is Chof on the base. This is yes, that's right. It's a Mishnah. It's a Mishnah Chof on the base. So Toshma lo yiftach odom chanus shanach toimen. A person's not allowed to open a shop. For a baker shop, a baker Savoyan, or a dyer's shop, underneath the storehouse of his friend. So in other words, this guy, you live on the bottom story, and the guy above, on the top, on the upper story, right, has a storehouse. So right. You're not allowed to open a bakery underneath him or a place to dye clothes. Why? Or velo refes bokar. And neither can you open a cowshed. Right? Why not? Why not? Well, obviously, because basically, if the guy is trying to store oil and wine upstairs, then all of these things are not going to be very good for the wine. You're going to get smoked wine and other things and bad odors. So the Gemara says Tamad Otsa. The implication is the only reason why it's not allowed is because he actually has an Otsa there now, right? He's got a storehouse. He's got an Otsa there. Clear and present damage is going to be caused.
He has a chazaka for it. So is that what the Gemara is trying to tell?
It's not so much that he's got a chazaka. It's that the implication is that you only have to be concerned about how you use your property if there is something there to damage as things stand. That's why we're going to use this to prove against Rava, which is why that introduction I gave was so important, because the critical thing is that Rava says it doesn't make a difference. Here it seems to imply you're not allowed to decide to open a bakery downstairs in a situation where the guy is already using the upstairs to store food. Holeka Otsar, if there's no storehouse upstairs, he's not currently using it for that purpose. Ovid, you're allowed to. It's not a problem. Question on Rava.
Why do you draw that conclusion? Why don't you say the other way around? It's obvious
That what?
that if he wasn't using it, he still can't do it because he may come to use it.
What you mean? No, but why? Then why is it talk about a situation when he does already have it?
I think.
No, I'm saying if he.
That's what I'm asking about.
I think I know what you're trying to get to with it, but it's going to be it's kind of going to be the reverse, right? If he's already got an Otsa there, so the implication is it's only because otherwise why say the bigger chiddush? The bigger chiddush would be that even if the guy hasn't got an Otsa there now, not using it for a storehouse upstairs, right? You still can't use your bottom story for things which might potentially prevent him in using his property for this purpose later on. That's what Rava would say. Because Rava would say, Eino Somech, you can't dig your bar right up to the wall because he might in future dig a bar in his pit and the roots are going to, that makes sense? That's why it's a question on Rava. So Gemora says, draws a very interesting distinction and says, Diroshani. There's a fundamental difference when we're talking about something, which is how a person normally lives and uses their house, uses their dwelling place. Now, it doesn't mean dwelling place. It doesn't mean a dwelling place. It doesn't mean a dwelling place, sort of as in actually living in. It means a normal use of the house, right? So to prevent you. So in other words, he's going to tell me Diroshani. So when you use your shop and everything else and the cowshed or whatever, is a normal way for you to use your property, right? Yeah. So we're not going to restrict you using it in that way unless you're directly causing damage. In other words, everyone's going to agree here. Everyone is going to agree here, right? Everyone is going to agree here. Even Rava, who normally says that we've got to think ahead and you can't put it nearby in case in the future you might use it. Rava's going to say, no, we're not going to be so restrictive here. Because to impose that restriction on you now is hugely, has huge implications. You're going to restrict anyone from using their property for these things. So Rava will say, everyone will agree here that it's only a problem if the guy is actually using it for an Otsa at the moment, right? Diroshani. So economically, what you can infer the same thing because it says on this case, it specifically says on this Mishnah, here it says explicitly, if the cowshed preceded the Otsa, it's allowed, it's mutter. If the usage downstairs preceded the moment when he decided to open his storage facility for wine upstairs, then it's okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So that's one. So let's just see Rashi on that. Rashi is second line. Selling bread from a sikin shom aratom. They fire up. They have to use fire the whole time. The light fires on. Otzos aliyah. The upper story shows about 12 Hashem and the yain. They store their produce and oil and wine for osh and kosher, and the osh on the smoke causes damage to them. The smell itself causes damage. So we answered the reason why this is not a question on Rava, because here even Rava agrees that unless the guy actually is using the upper story to store fruit now, you are allowed to do what you like downstairs because it's dira. Chanus v'reves bokar, the shop or a cow shed, diros and shalodamhein. That the normal living, a person has to live with these things. It's normal to use your property in that way. And we don't prohibit you to use your dwelling in a normal dwelling type way, unless there's direct damage now. Dekanami, and you can infer this, the Dirashani, the dwelling place is different, because it says clearly on that case, and where's if the cowshed came before the storehouse, it's permitted. All the other distancing in our Mishnah doesn't say this. You see from here, it's only here because it's a living place, it's different. The other cases, even the first one has to distance himself. Even the first one has to distance himself. Yeah. Okay, fine. So does that make sense? Yeah.
So if someone had a whatever it was, a bakery, and then I decided to use my property upstairs to store wine and stuff.
Yeah.
And the smoke damages it.
Yeah.
Then it's my fault because I should have known that smoke was already there and would be damaged.
Effectively, yes, basically yes. That's what we're saying. We're saying that if he opened his bakery before you decided to use your upper story to store fruit, I mean, it sounds like the bakery doesn't cause a problem for normal living. Apart from anything else, they were much more used to sort of these things.
Well, the heat might have damaged stuff.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem to be, because the concern seems to be only if you decide to use your upper story for something that's particularly sensitive. You're storing fruit up there or something like that.
How can you anticipate that?
You don't need to. That's the point. You don't need to anticipate that the guy upstairs might use it for that purpose. Okay. But if he's already using it for that purpose, then you can't.
Right.
Then you can't. Yeah.
Is this a difference between the dira being his first place of accommodation, or the dira being a set of shops? If you see what I mean.
Yes. It's a little bit misleading, the word dira, because the word dira, of course, we translate as dwelling. Here, it doesn't quite mean that. It means a sort of normal living, and it's a normal function of living to want to open a bakery or to a cow shed. Exactly. As a commercial premises, that would be a normal use. Exactly.
And you have usage classes. So, for example, you can't turn your residential home into
D1.
There you go.
I fought for years to get one of my previous community to get D1 use. Because it was a house, we had to get D1 use. We managed to get it because it was 10 years. We proved we'd used it illegally for 10 years as a shul. Yeah, I said no. It came to tribunal. It was what do they call it? A hearing, proper tribunal hearing. Everyone, all the members in Hadi wanted to get up there in front of the tribunal and say, "I was there 10 years ago. Yes, I used it in that way." We had like 60 witnesses, and that's how we got the class changed to D1, because that's the law. If you use it for 10 years, it becomes permitted use.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There's a lot of parallels.
Yes,
a lot of parallels. Usage rights and stuff. Anyway, so we dealt with that one, and that's why that case is not a question, Robert. Toshma, let's prove from here to whether the question. A person not allowed to plant a tree next to the field unless he distances it 4 amos, unless he's 4 amos away. Now, the reason is because Elon here is a tree, as in a the Gemora spells it out, and there's a brisa which explains why that you need 4 amos in order to work the vineyards. This tree is a vine, for example, and you need 4 amos. Basically, it's like a turning circle for your ox. He's with the plow. To work the vineyard, you need 4 amos. You can't go right up to the wall because you need to be able to maneuver the maneuver the machines around it. So the Gemara says, the implication is, why do you have to be 4 amos away from the field? Only because you need space to work the vineyard. Okay, and if you don't have that space, what's going to happen? You're going to the implement you're using is going to basically directly enter the other guy's land. You can't shrink the plow. The plow needs 4 amos. So if you have 3 amos, 1 amma of your plow is going to end up in the other guy's property, which is obviously directly damaging his property. He doesn't want a plow churning up his land. Yeah. So the implication is only because of Kedei Avodas HaKerem. If not for the reason of Kedei Avodas HaKerem, Somich, you'd be allowed to put your tree, your vine, right up against the wall. Even though there are roots that cause damage, even though there are roots that go underneath and cause direct damage. Now that's a problem. That's a problem according to Rava, I would say, no? Because I think so. They should be a problem. Yes.
It's interesting because in the first place we've done Chitzas HaKerem Shenifetza. If the wall of a vineyard falls down, then you have to force them to rebuild it. So you are liable for the damage to the wall from the vineyard.
Yes, we did learn that. You're liable for the damage. That's when. That's what. Okay, but that's because you. I don't know. How did it come down though? For so it's like however, yeah, that's because if you cause damage, you're liable to pay for it. Yeah, you're liable to pay for it.
But not if you might cause damage.
Yeah, here we're saying that even though there are roots that are going to go underneath and they're going to cause damage by going underneath, okay, it's not a problem. You don't have to worry about that.
But you do have to worry about plowing. Is that what you're saying?
The question is like this. I mean, if you look at, Tosfos spells this out really nicely. If you look at Tosfos, just look at this Tosfos Tamor, the large, yeah, where the Raschel Tamor. Tosfos asked it as a question. It could have asked this question in a really simple way. How much does it tell you to distance? 4 amos. If Rava is correct that you cannot put a tree nearby because the roots might cause future damage, the measure is 25 amos. That's how far away the Mishnah says later on. You have to distance 25 amos because the roots will go that far. It's just inferring even within 4 amos you're allowed to come close. The question is that the Mishnah is only worried about damage transpiring from the plow entering his field. The Mishnah is not worried about any damage being caused by the roots of a tree. According to Rava, that's a big problem. Because according to Rava, you're never allowed to come anywhere near. You can't plant a tree anywhere near the boundary because of the future roots that might cause damage at some point later on. Yeah. That's what we're saying. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. Why are we not bothered? Well, according to Rava, you don't have. Why do you have to start talking about a plow? Why do you have to talk about? You got to make sure you leave enough space for the plow, otherwise it's going to damage his land. What are you going to do with the plow? You can't plant a tree if there's a potential later on for damage to be caused to his land, even if there's nothing there in his land now. Right? The Gemara gives a very straightforward answer. There's a rock there. There's some bedrock there. The case is there's some bedrock there that the roots are not going to go inside. So there's no problem. There's no concern about roots causing damage.
Also, roots aren't a certainty.
They are.
Are they?
I think. Yeah.
Well,
they might go in the other direction. I think they go.
My knowledge of arboriculture is pretty limited. But
There's a whole lot about that later on.
we also
It's a good word though.
thank you.
There's a lot.
You couldn't plant close to the neighbour's field as a kilayim.
Yes, yeah.
So here we there's no, if he hasn't got stuff in the field, we aren't worried that he's gonna, if I'm growing grapes and the guy's field's barren or whatever, empty, so I can grow my grapes close to them 4 amos according to that opinion, because I don't have to be worried that one day he might grow figs.
You're saying you don't have to worry about that. So it's interesting. I mean, I don't know whether or not you have to be worried about it or not. Toras makes this point as well. The other Toras makes this point about why it talks about avodas hakerem. We didn't mention a vineyard, it's about a tree. I mean, I explained this meaning of vine, but actually it says really it's a tree, and it only uses that phrase avodas hakerem from kilayim, because in kilayim you need this 4 amos to prevent any problem of kilayim.
Even though the roots are going to go 25 hours.
Yeah, so that's all discussed in kilayim about why it is we are not concerned in Hilchos Kilayim. Hilchos Kilayim is very specific criteria, and I don't think we're concerned of more than 4 amos, even though you can. You're right. Even though the roots will go and it's got a different set of rules. It's got a different set of rules. There's a Mishnah in Kilayim which talks about the maximum number of different type of varieties of seed you can plant in a one space. Aruga, it's called Perak Aruga, is the third Perak of Kilayim. You kind of like, Aruga is a patch. So you draw a patch. How many? Where can you put the seeds so that you can get as many as possible in the patch without halachically being a problem? Yeah. Anyway, that's the answer we give here, in the sense that we're not worried about this because we're talking about mafsik tsunma. The rock is interrupting. So the way the Gemora, the way that we'll go with the way the Bach reads it, I think the Bach says it says that this is another question now. Toshma, let's the Gemora asks. So there's 2 ways of reading this. The brackets is Dekanami Diktani, but the Bach reads it as another question. Toshma, let's ask from here. I prove from here. Time. So Mishnah said there was a wall in between. The Bryce says this one can put his trees or whatever right up to the wall, and so can the other one. Rashi is going to talk about kilayim. Why kilayim? There's no issue there. You see clearly that there's no concern about the roots going underneath and causing damage. Right? So if there's a wall in between, we're not worried about the space you need to service the vine, because there's a wall. So you're not going to go into his field. So therefore you can go right up to the edge. The Gemara says, and therefore the question is, how is it you're allowed to do that? How is it you're allowed to put your planting right up to the wall? You've got the old problem. According to Rava, you shouldn't be allowed to do that because of what he might use it for in future, etc., etc. One gives the same answer, Hachinami to Batsunma, where there's a rock there underneath or whatever the ground, so there's no concern it's going to cause any damage. Ihachi says no. So Amos Sefer, look at the end of the brisa. If the roots were going out inside the friend's field, what happens if the Baal Hasoda, the guy next door, discovers roots? What's his rights? He finds the roots. What's he allowed to do? Right? Is he allowed to destroy them? So the answer is he's allowed to. Yeah. That tree is growing into your garden and stuff like that, right? You're allowed to sort of deepen them, or to a depth of 3 tefachim, you're allowed to cut them off. So they don't obstruct the plow, your use of your land. You want to use your plow, so you've got 3 tefachim depth. You can get rid of the roots in order to use your plow. Again, I was asking a simple practical question. If the scenario is that there's a rock there, there's a bedrock there, right? So, right, my bowl, Shrosh and Hossam, why are there roots? There can't be roots. Yeah, there's a rock, can't be roots. How can you discover roots? So Hacham is what it's saying. The lavtun, if there's no rock, while you Shrosho, Yotzin, and there were roots going out into the friend's field, Marmek Shlosh Tefachim, you have to you deepen 3 tvachim. You destroy them up to a depth of 3 tvachim so that it doesn't hold back the plow, right? So we resolve all of these, and in this way. Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, the Gemora says, by the way, the big punchline to last, meaning the biggest case from where we actually kind of establish really fundamentally what the machlokes, especially the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yossi, is. We'll come back to that. Is the final case, which is the scenario of bees and honey, and mustard. We're getting to bees, honey, and mustard. It's called the sugya of chardal. It's very famous in yeshivas. The next Amud. Why? Because Tosfos is very complicated. We're going to do Rashi, which is much more straightforward. Tosfos is very complicated, and it's a very lomdish sugya. There's a lot of Tosfos on the next Amud, and it's called the sugya of chardal because it discusses mustard.
So, hoping for more of a condiment-based answer.
No, but it is interesting actually, the condiment aspect is here. But that's anyway, we'll get there in a second. But hopefully we have time. Let's see Rashi. Rashi is Elohim Cain, Hirachik Mimenu Arba Amas, kind of a quarter of the way down. Unless he distance for Amos, going to fire Thomas as Rashi is explained, so you got space to service the vineyard. They would plow the vineyard with a plow. Time of the harvest, they would harvest them with cattle or whatever. But you needed a space of Amos, so the calf of the plow wouldn't go into the other guy's field. He's causing direct damage, not fact, you'd be able to, not for that, you'd be able to go right up to the border. And even though the Sofishi is the roots are going to end up going into the field. They're going to either hold back the other guy's plow, or they're going to obstruct him if he wants to dig a pit. That's a question on Rava, because Rava said it's not. Rava said it's a problem. This implies it's not a problem. We're only worried about the 4 amas for the plow. We're not worried about the roots going under or causing damage afterwards. There's a strong bedrock or whatever, so it's not going to go underneath. Now, Geder in time, we said there's a wall in between. If there was a wall in between, he's not causing any more further damage to the work of the service of the vineyard. This one is allowed to put his trees up to the wall over here. This one is allowed to put his trees up to the wall over here. And even if one of them is a stay lovon is basically a field that is growing crops in. Ein kan kilayim. So Rashi, by the way, it deals with your question about kilayim. He says even if one of them is a field growing crops, there's no problem of kilayim. As it says in Eruvin, gefanim mikan. If you have vines on one side, mutar ezra kan. You're allowed to sow the other side of the wall, the other side with crops. Gabinot arbo kundisin amotach smara gabeyan. In the situation there, it's talking about where you put the Gemora there is talking about where you put 4 poles in the ground and you stretch like a branch between the poles, like a chuppah, basically. The damyu l'tzuras hapesach, because that is like itzuras hapesach, an entranceway, So in other words, the Gemara in Eruvin, this is why I said that the halachos of kilayim is something that's difficult to get your head around, because basically what we're saying is if there is a wall in between, or even there's no wall, but there's a tzuras hapesach, your poles and wire, you can put your crops right up to there on one side and your vine right up to the other side, because you've got a halachic heker. You've got something that distinguishes between the two, and that's okay. And that's what we're saying. So that's why we're not worried here about the problem of potential of kilayim. So we see at least this one is allowed to go close by. Even though roots are going to go underneath the wall and they're going to spread into the field. So we said that we said if there's a rock there, how can they get underneath? So we said that so we gave the same answer. There's a rock, and then we said, okay, well, what about how can you have the roots getting there then? And we said we're saying if there was no rock, then you can get rid of them. The owner of the field can chop off the roots. They go into his field. There's no rock. He was planting there incorrectly. he deepens them. When they cause damage, or so they shouldn't cause damage when they become sort of developed. These roots. Okay. So what we've done is basically resolve all the cases by saying that don't ask on Rava, because Rava says you've got to think ahead and take precautions. You can't go near the wall in case later on you might use it for something. We've answered very simply by saying these scenarios, you know why that wasn't an issue? Because there was no concern of future damage. There was some bedrock there that was never going to allow any future damage, right? One more case before we get to the primary proof. You have to distance the tree from the pit, 25 amas. That's what it says in the Mishnah later on, 25 amas. The implication is only because there's a pit. If there's no pit there in the other guy's field, you're allowed to go right up to the wall. Right? Who's that question on? Same as before, Rava, right? You're in no pit, you're allowed to go right up to the wall. How can that be? It says when there's no pit, you also can't go up to the wall. It's simply coming to tell you after 25 amas, roots go and damage the pit. That's the only reason it talks about the pit being there, so that you are aware of the fact that within a radius of 25 amas from where you put your tree, those roots have the potential to cause harm. That's all. But actually, Rava will say, even if the guy hasn't yet dug the bar, you still have the same problem, right? Look at the end of the Mishnah, which says, if the tree came first, you don't have to chop it down. If you're not allowed to put it close by in the first place, as Rava says, how can you ever have a scenario that the tree came first? All right? Let's look at that Mishnah in a second. It's worth seeing the Mishnah inside a second. It's on Chof Hei Amud Beis. So Chof Hei Amud Beis. We saw this Mishnah last time, but we didn't do the whole Mishnah. The Mishnah says, you have to distance a tree from the pit, 25 amas. If it's a carob tree or a sesame tree, 50 amas. Whether it is above, one of them is higher, let's say it's on a slope, or whether it's on the side, on flat lands, on the side, make a difference, right? So it doesn't make a difference whether the land is on an incline or not. You have to be those distances away. That's what the Mishnah says, the first opinion. Im habar kodmo. Now, if the pit came first, right? So the question now is, the Mishnah goes on to say, the halacha is you need to make sure your tree is 25 amas away from the other guy's pit. Fine, right? Now, what happens if you didn't? And you planted it illegally? What's the halacha? Ima bar kodma, if the pit came first, as the other guy's pit existed before you planted your tree illegally, the halacha is you have to chop down your tree. You have to chop down your tree and pay. And pay. Who? What?
So it's a fruit tree.
No, he has to pay.
Then you have to cut down your.
Yeah, that's a separate issue. How are you allowed to cut down your tree? Because it's a fruit tree. Yeah, well, you weren't allowed to plant it there. Someone must ask that. Yeah, but what does it mean v'nosein domim? So Rashi says the kiven de bereshus nota. He planted with the permission. It's not going to cause damage until much later on. Chazal did not make you cut it down without receiving funding from the other guy because the damage caused to the individual. It's quite interesting. You're not allowed to plant a tree within 25 amas, right? If you did, you got to remove it. Why? Because potentially it's going to cause damage in the future. But it doesn't mean you lose out. We can make you lose out financially. So he's got to pay. He's got to pay for you to do so.
Does he pay just for the sapling? Because it'll only be a sapling, you know.
I think.
Does he have to pay for the value of the fruit that he could have
It sounds like it depends how much it's grown. Maybe it's grown a lot in the meantime. So it might be more. It might be more than that.
Well,
the point here is,
if you could see it.
Pardon?
If you could see the tree growing, why would you allow it to grow? You've got to cut it down. As soon as he plants it, the guy's going to turn up from the neighbouring field and say, "Hey, I've got my pit here. You're not allowed to plant this tree, cut it down, please.
Well, I would imagine that he has the ability to object. Presumably, he can object any time, right? I would imagine, right?
I think you're putting it in the context, Graham, looking out your back window. This could very well possibly be somebody who has acres and acres and acres of land. And so it's more than possible that the tree arises over a period of time, but they only notice after a period of time.
Yeah, could be.
Sorry, who pays who? I don't understand.
Basically, he has got a right to force you to cut down your tree. Why? Because it may in the future cause subsidence, cause damage to his land. But he's got to pay you for that. He's going to refund you. You can be obligated. You can be obligated. I can force you to do something which is going to fundamentally disrupt what you wanted to use your property for, which was to plant a fruit tree, right? I can force you to stop that because of the damage, but I'm gonna have to pay for it. I can choose not to pay, and then you can leave your tree there.
I understand. The Mishnah says he's got a pit there. You can't build that. So why should I have to pay
So-
for doing something that damages?
So that's what Rashi there comes to explain. So the last Rashi on the Mishnah says that he uses a very strange phrase, which is "birashus nota." Since you planted it with permission, you're going to ask me if he didn't plant with permission because he weren't supposed to. Rashi qualifies what he means. What does it mean you planted with permission? She'eino mazik ad zman gadol, because the damage, the actual hezek, is only going to take place much later on. When you put your tree in your ground, nothing's happened at all. There's no hezek. You haven't caused any damage. This is all about future potential loss in the future. Therefore, the Chachamim didn't say we're going to make you chop down that tree. Just tough. Could chop it down, lose the money. It's your fault, right? Right? Okay.
So what about future earnings? If he's
No.
for the chopping of the tree,
Well, that might be evaluated what the tree is worth.
you mean in the cost?
Maybe.
Paying back.
Potentially. I don't know exactly how they work it out.
I get the
Well, what do you? Yeah, I mean, yeah,
the initial cost of chopping the boat day,
yeah.
all the fruit and the produce.
Maybe you have to pay for that as well.
You shouldn't they?
Doesn't it encourage rather silly behaviour? Because if I see my neighbour's got a pit, and I'm going under, I should start planting trees, and you have to pay me to cut them down. It doesn't make sense.
Well, he doesn't have to pay you. If he objects to the way you're using your land. Remember, it's your property.
The halacha says you can't build.
The halacha says you are supposed to distance your tree away from his property, right?
You've transgressed that.
Well, it's a paradox only because fundamentally it's a chiddush that I can object to you using your property in this way. So we're giving you the right to object. You can stop me using my land how I want to use it, but you can't expect me to also be out of pocket for that.
Except that's a rule that you can't use your land.
Now that means you've got a choice. You living next door are going to have got a choice. You can either say, okay, no, who says it's going to anyway cause damage to me? Maybe I'm not going to use my land in this way, all that type of thing, whatever. Or I've got to borrow here. I've got to borrow. Says I'll borrow it.
Right, but it's still got to be some element of certainty versus possibility. Because even if you've got a bar there, not 100 times out of 100, it's not necessarily going to cause the damage you think it is. And as to your point, if it hasn't caused the damage yet, you cannot quantify something that hasn't happened.
Yeah.
Right. And so you can't be certain. Well, also forget that maybe I don't know anything about roofs, but say the street gets struck by lightning, it falls down, right? So it never actually enacts that damage. And so therefore, by definition, though you've transgressed the point, that you shouldn't have built it, planted it near the wall, because no damage has occurred, and there's a possibility that it will, therefore removing it at that point, there's a payment involved.
I think that's right. I think the point is, that's something Rashi is really saying here. You're right. Is that because at the moment it's done nothing. Therefore, and I suppose within that is it might not. It might.
I could transplant a fully grown olive tree into my garden, or I can grow a sapling. One day it's going to cause damage. So the Mishnah is saying you mustn't do it within 25 hours. So otherwise, why wouldn't the Mishnah just started with the words? If the boar came first, then you have to pay it. I don't understand. It just doesn't make sense to me. But maybe this is my fault.
What are you struggling with? No, it's really important. I mean, like I said, this parak is interesting in the sense that we revolve around these points the whole way through. So it's worth exploring them. It's not like it's a. But I'm saying, what are you struggling with particularly? You think he should have to chop his tree down?
Plant here.
Yeah.
So I go and plant there, and then I go and say to the guy, or he comes to me and says, "Hold on a second, the halakha says you can't plant here." I said, "I'm very sorry. Pay me to chop it down there." That doesn't make sense.
Because you would like it to say that you did something illegal.
You've got to take it away. Finished.
You've done something illegal, so therefore you've got to take it down.
Because it's either going to cause me now or tomorrow damage.
But what I'm saying is in halacha in general, he says, well, no, very sweeping statement. In halacha in general, yeah, until it happens, it hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And so therefore, and I'm sure there's lots of other examples I could bring. Yeah.
No, but then I think Ellie's problem is that he said, I think what you're struggling with is this middle of the road situation where you're not allowed to do something, but there's a mitigating circumstances, which basically say you're not allowed to do it, but actually you haven't caused damage yet. So if the other guy wants to come along and force you to remove a potential offending item, he doesn't have to. Part of the problem with this is you're thinking, how can you expect him to pay because you planted a tree? He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to pay anything. He can leave the tree there.
But why should his children suffer?
Okay, fine, but it's all potential and if, and it's a long time in the future and everything else. If you want to force me,
wouldn't say don't build within 25 hours.
No, because you shouldn't do it. You shouldn't do it, but that doesn't mean you need to suffer financial loss if you did when you haven't yet actually caused any harm.
But perhaps a nod to the.
I've got written on the side of my Gemora from many years ago. Iron Gillian Hashas.
But perhaps there's also that to balance out the dichotomy on the other side. The dichotomy on the other side is why should I not be able to do what I want to my land?
Yeah.
But there's
yes, that's what balances it. That's exactly right.
What's that first
The point is that you are still allowed to do what you want on the land.
Yeah.
The halacha advises you not to do it because you might damage.
Yeah.
If you go ahead and do it,
Then if you have to undo it,
damage is remote.
Yeah.
not really advised.
What are you looking for?
because
That's fine. All right.
It's not that you're not allowed to do it. You should be allowed to do it.
you're not Jewish enough. That's your problem. Yeah.
What?
That's a bit more climate, right? This is your land, right? I'm the king of my castle. I get to do what I want on my land. Now, the other thing also is exactly the first come, first served principle is also difficult because what you're saying is because the guy next door built a bar, I can't use my land. So, in fact, you could say, okay, fine, I never plant a tree, but you've got to compensate me for not being able to plant a tree.
But it's the same principle.
Because you've done the bar.
Baker.
Right.
The storehouse.
So you've got to compensate me for digging that bar because you stopped me from singing that tree. So instead we say, if you did plant the tree, to take it down, you've got to compensate me because then at least you put the choice in the hands of the owner of the bar, whether he does or he doesn't.
Well, it's making it harder for the owner of the bar to actually impose something on someone else's name.
In case of the storehouse and
Yeah,
the bakery.
yeah.
The halakha is you can't put the bakery there. Finished. You can't do that. Storehouse again.
Well, that's true. Although, again, and this is where you'd have to look up what happens if you did. The question is, what happens if you did? The question is, what happens if you did?
So I would say, well, it's instant damages, right? If damage to stock, pay for it. Is that surely that's it wouldn't be that the storehouse guy comes to compensate the baker.
But by opening the bakery downstairs, you fundamentally undermine the value of the guy's property upstairs.
So what's the difference here? You've undermined the value of this guy's pitch.
I think we'll have to revisit it. I've got to try and find just see what he said. But look at the next bit of the Mishnah because this is the bit we're focusing on here. No, it's fine. Yeah, no, it's fine. It's fine. In a bar kodma, the closest for no sin domin. So if the pit came first, we said you cut it down, he has to pay. In ilon kodam. Now, what happens if the tree came first? You plant your tree, and when you planted the tree, there was no bar next door.
Yeah.
Lo yokut. Can't make him chop it down. Suffix there, suffix there, and also if it's a doubt, which one was first? No one can remember. Like you said, it was at the end of the 80 acres down the road, at the end of the farm. No one knows which came first, right? Leokas, you don't have to chop it down. You don't have to chop it down. Now, then on that, we have the famous opinion of Rabbi Yossi, right? Rabbi Yossi Omer, even if the pit came before the tree, leokas, you don't chop it down because you're planting in this, you're planting in your field, and you're digging in your field, and I don't care. Rabbi Yossi says, do what you like in your land, and you do what like in you do what you like in your land, and I'm not interested in anything else. That's Rabbi Yossi, right? He has to move away. It's not a problem, right? What's the question from this mission on Rava? What does Rava say? Rava says what? You're never allowed to be so. How can you have
you can't ever plant it?
Yeah, how can you ever have a situation in Ilon Kodam if the tree came first? If the tree came first, you don't have to force you to chop it down. What do you mean? You can never plant a tree up to a wall. You can never get close to a wall. You with me?
Maybe it was just there from time immemorial and
just there.
Yeah, in other words, you're the new owner. You bought a new
all right.
with a lovely tree in it. So it's not you never planted the tree. It was there.
You're not a million miles away from the Gemora's answer. So let's go back now to our Gemora. So the Gemora says, let's go from the question, start this little piece again. You distance the tree from the pit 25 amas. The reason is because there's a pit. If there was no pit, you can go right up nearby. So the Gemara says, no, when there's no pit there, you also can't go close by. That's how we resolve according to Rava. Up to 25 amas, it goes and damages the pit. That's how we resolve it according to Rava. Rava says you can't go close whether there's a pit there or not, and it's just telling you how far roots cause damage to a pit. Look at the end of the Mishnah. The end of the Mishnah says, if a tree came first, you can't force him to chop it down. If you're not allowed to get close, according to Rava, how can you ever have a scenario of a tree being planted, and the guy turning around and saying, I came first, and therefore you can't force me to chop down my tree? The Gemara answers because Rav Papa says belokeach, where he bought it that way. Hachinami here as well, belokeach, when he bought it that way. So what exactly that means? Let's see Rashi. Rashi says, Esrim Chamisha Amas, just the Rashi's on this. They estimate the roots go and they damage the walls of the pit. Up 25 amas, the roots go and they damage the pit. Look at the end of the Mishnah. The tree came first, you can't chop it down either. If you didn't get close by, how can you have the scenario? How can you have a case where the tree came first? So Rashi asked this question. Hold on a second. You can have a case where he broke the law. That's how you can have a tree first. Where he shouldn't have done it. But if why shouldn't you chop it down? Mali bar kodam diktani kotis. What's the difference if the pit came first, where you can force him to chop down the tree, or maishna ilan kodam? And what's the difference if the tree came first? The tani lo yokas. You can't chop it down, right? You know what I'm saying? According to Rava, if you're not allowed to put the tree next to the wall, even if the guy doesn't have a pit there in the moment, right? What's to make a difference whether or not the tree was first? It was illegal. It was forbidden, right? It's the same thing. You weren't allowed to put that tree down. That you should have to be able to remove. We can force you to remove your tree, right? So the Gemara answers when it comes to as Rav Papa says later on, where it's talking about a buyer. Here as well, but Lekech says Rashi, Adam, what's the case of Lekech? Adam shenot ilam soich sodeu. Person planted a tree inside his field, and then he sold half the land to someone else. And the buyer came and dug a pit in the half that he just bought. He doesn't have to chop down the tree because he planted it with the other guy's permission. When you planted the tree, you owned the whole land. That's the scenario, according to Rava, where you can have a tree planted on a border. Simple, right? If you own all the land and then sold half of it to the other guy, and then he digs a pit, that's what the Mishnah is talking about. In that situation, if the tree came first, he can't force him to chop it down. If the tree didn't come first, the pit came first, then obviously that's not talking about, you know, that you didn't have the tree there.
So
It must have been you sold it, and then, you know, the guy has the pit, then he dug his pit, and then you planted your tree. Well, that's no good. Then he can force you to chop it down.
Get to Thailand, then sell half of it.
Yeah.
With the tree there.
No, the tree stays where it is, but that's why you can have a tree on the border, because you later on decided to sell half your land.
That's actually agreed to know.
You agreed, you knew about it, yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right, that's
No
right.
restrictive covenants.
No restrictive covenants. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Fine. So we didn't quite get to the bees. Next week in Mitzvah Hashem, we will do the bees. So the last proof is the final one for the sugya, where basically you encounter a scenario where both parties damage each other. The bees eat, or potentially bees eat mustard seeds, and by eating the mustard seeds, they go and eat the honey in the honeycomb. So both are which is causing damage to the owner of the bees. The bees. Basically, the case is where the bees. Brilliant. You see, the mustard is sharp on the bees' tongues, whatever bees have, and then and then you don't have to know much anatomy for this. And then the bees go back and they consume the honey because of the sharpness on their tongues.
Oh, I see.
So they're eating the mustard, the other guy, and they're also damaging.
Because their tongue's so tight.
That's right, so sharp. Yeah. We'll see you next time. Yeah. Okay, take care.
Yeah.
Go ahead.